Okay, and hello and good afternoon. Cool, we're live. Oh, I need to turn down the feedback on my tablet because that's going to really annoy me. There we go. I'll mute that so I don't hear my own voice about 5 seconds behind. Hey, Yulia, how are you? Cool. Yeah, good. Kind of a bit, I don't know, a bit crazy morning this morning, so I don't feel as well prepared today. But never mind, we'll muddle through. We've done this stuff before now. So, for those of you that don't know us, for the first time watching, my name's Sam Machin. I'm a product manager at Vonage. Particularly, I look at our low-code tools, so things like NodeRED, Zapier, and these kind of environments. And with me, I've got Yulia.
With low-code tools as well, mostly creating content and supporting the community around low-code tools and our API.
Cool. Yeah, as Alex just pointed out, I had your mic muted, so I think we got most of you there. But we got your I'm a developer advocate bit onwards, so I think that's fine. You're breaking up. We're gonna have, I don't know, I feel like we're gonna have technical problems today. Anyway, so today what we're going to talk about is we're going to go back, and really this should have probably been the first show, but we're going to talk about NodeRED from a getting started point of view. So, you know, if you're brand new to this kind of thing and you want to play with NodeRED, how can you install it, different ways to run it, different ways, well, where to get it from, what is it, that kind of thing. And also then we're going to look at just some of the kind of principles of building things inside the flows and the editor. So I say this is really show one of the NodeRED scenario, but we kind of jumped ahead and wanted to show cool things. So let's cool, and we've even got people commenting in the stream. Welcome to the hell that is OBS. Actually, I think that was my stream deck, Alex. But yeah. So
actually, the first one we did with NodeRED should still be online, I think.
Yes, yeah. So that was 4 weeks ago. That would have been today. 2 weeks.
2 weeks,
4 weeks. I can't remember.
4
weeks. Yeah, can't do the math. So yeah, that's still online. I think there's some plan to move them somewhere to archive them or something. So cool. Anyway, so NodeRED. This is the NodeRED homepage, nodered.org, which is a good place to start for anything. And I think we've talked about it before, so I'll go back and watch the first show. But kind of what NodeRED is I always look at this tagline at the top here has changed quite a few times in the last 12, 18 months that I've been working with it. But and it really shows how it's kind of evolving. But today it's described as low-code programming for event-driven applications. And that's quite good. It started off saying, which about Internet of Things. I can't remember exactly what it was. I think it was flow-based programming for the Internet of Things, wasn't it, or something? And really that's because the heritage is back in the sort of Internet of Things, controlling, reading sensors and temperature data or machine controls and that kind of use case. But it's, especially in the last year, it's really broadened its reach into all kinds of other programming. Event-driven applications is a really good way of describing it, because actually from a kind of code or a workflow perspective, getting a bit of data from a temperature sensor or getting a text message or somebody posting some information on a form are all very, very similar. Something happens and you get a piece of information and you want to process that and put it somewhere. So really that kind of, it just shows how NodeRED has grown from its original origins of IoT out to being a far more broad platform. And it's still really good for IoT. In fact, one of the things I'm going to show you is a little bit IoT-ish today anyway, because we've got some more hardware. But anyway, the first things first really is, how do you get started? So NodeRED is an open source project, and that means that there are 101 different ways to run it, which is really good. The downside is there are 101 ways to run it, so you need to figure out which way works best for you. If we look at the Get Started page on the site, there's quite a nice little intro thing with some of the ways to run it, and there are some more. So the simplest way to run it, NodeRED is a server. It's an application, so you can run that on your computer, on your laptop, Mac, Windows, Linux. It would run on just about anything. And so that's in some ways probably the most basic. And in terms of, if you're looking at this page on a computer, you've got everything you need to run it. So you need to install it. Now this is where it gets a little bit scary, because we talk about opening up terminals and things. So for those of you maybe that aren't familiar with this kind of stuff, because this is low code, on your Mac you have a terminal. It won't look quite like this. It'll probably look like this by default, but because I'm an elite hacker, I have to have a dark black terminal with blue semi-see-through text and things, and change my font. But for most people, if you just open the terminal application on your Mac, you'll get this black and white window here. Cool. Hi, Greg. Glad you about NodeRED basics. Cool. Yep, and we're going to talk about it on the Pi. So yeah, we'll get to that in a second. But basically, we open a terminal and we will install it. So NodeRED is written in Node.js, which is a JavaScript language, and therefore you need some Node tools to run it as well. And there are some guides on here. If you're on a Raspberry Pi, you can just use the Pi script, installing things from here. If you're on Windows, there's notes and things about it there. But basically, we're going to type this command, sudo npm install -g unsafe perm, which just gives it some more permissions, really, NodeRED. And that will, a whole bunch of stuff will flash up your screen. I won't do it because I've already done it on this machine. So you'll kind of see other things. But it will ultimately get you to a stage where you have NodeRED installed. And then he says, looking for his terminal windows. Let's do it in a basic window as well, just to be make that a little bit bigger. And we can then, to run, once it's installed on our machine, we can start it by just typing NodeRED. And what you see is a whole bunch of text. NodeRED is installed, blah, 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 and it will, you shouldn't probably see some of these because I've got all sorts of other stuff on my machine. That's something I've been playing with, 1-3 words, but you'll get some of these info messages. This is all kind of fairly safe stuff and started flows. And then what we should get somewhere, server now running at, and this address here, 127.0.0.1.1880. So for those who don't know, 127.0, this is an IP address. IP addresses are what every computer on the internet has as a way of identifying them. This 127 address is kind of special because everybody has this address. And this address means my computer. So this address is only reachable. So I could put in an address of another computer on the internet and connect to that. But this is what's known as a loopback address. It allows me to connect to my computer. So you can put this in on your computer and your computer will go to that address. Your web browser will go to your computer. It's localhost, it's also known as. So what we can do is we can pop that address into our web browser and we'll see our NodeRED editor. Now I'm just going to do a quick switch because what I want to do is, rather than showing you the NodeRED, oh, there we go, with all my junk in it, I'm going to use a little hack I have to set up a completely clean, fresh NodeRED instance. If anybody wants to know how to do that, will send me a DM or something. I've just posted it in the NodeRED Slack channel, actually. But what we have now is once you will open it up, and it won't ask you for a username and password by default, because out of the box it's just open. You will have something that looks like this. This is a completely standard stock NodeRED editor page. So we've got, Yulia's going to go onto this in a bit with what they are, but there we go. We have NodeRED running locally on my machine. Of course, there are other ways to run it. If we go back to the thing, so if you don't want to run it on your computer for some reason, there are various ways. Ibm Cloud has a way you can log into IBM Cloud, sign up for an account, and get the free account. You don't even need to put your credit card in. There was some interesting chatter actually about they've changed something on their free tier. So if you sign up for billing, you can no longer have the free tier. But if you don't sign up for billing, you can still have the free tier, maybe. But you can run an instance on IBM Cloud, and even if I think the first paid tier starts at about $5 or $6 a month or something, and they will run a container of NodeRED on the web somewhere. So instead of going to that IP address of your local machine, you get an address like samsnodered.com ibmmycloud.com or whatever it is. And basically, it always has a web address. So you can run it on there. You can run it on Amazon, on AWS as well. Really, what we're talking about when we run it on AWS is actually starting up a server, because actually you can run it on any Linux server on the internet. So AWS, you just get an EC2 server. So you pay an amount a month. Again, I think it's about $7 a month for the smallest instance on AWS. And that gives you a server, and that server can run NodeRED on it. So you can't run it on a sort of serverless function at the moment or anything there. The IBM Cloud is a bit different because it's a kind of container, and similarly Azure. There's also quite a nice way of running it on Heroku, which NodeRED, I'm just going to look for it in Google. NodeRED Heroku. There's this package here that somebody's created where you can deploy to Heroku. Heroku is a really nice way to run NodeRED because it's a containerized application. So NodeRED will run constantly on there. So, but if it's the only application you have running in your Heroku, it will run within your free allowance. So you can run one NodeRED server for an entire month, because Heroku charge you by the hour. So, but you get enough free hours to run one application constantly for a month. So we could do that deploy to Heroku button, and it's going to ask me to log into Heroku. But let's see if my 1Password knows my Heroku. There we go. Hey, I don't show anybody my password because it's 1Password. But we can go into Heroku, and there we go. It'll say deploy your own NodeRED, and you give it a name, whatever you want to call it, which region you want to run it in. It bundles in MongoDB. Asks you for a username and password to secure the editor, which is really good and really important. So that means that only you can get to. So if you're running NodeRED locally on your computer, you don't need to worry so much about securing it because it's your computer. And if you're not opening up to the internet, then you're okay. As soon as you open up to the internet, which we'll come on to, you should secure the editor. But obviously, if you're running it in the cloud on somebody else's computer, you need to enable the username and password. There's a bit in the NodeRED docs on security, but this Heroku app is a really nice way of doing that. So Heroku is a really good way to run it. And in terms of cloud hosting, IBM Cloud is also pretty good. Obviously, IBM and NodeRED have a really kind of strong relationship. A complicated relationship might be a better way to describe it. There's other things, other containers. So Docker. Again, if you're of the Docker persuasion, you can run it as a Docker container. I've used that quite a bit for dev, actually. Docker is really nice because if you want to just give me another instance of NodeRED. And finally, the other one, which to me is really just another computer, but is quite a cool way of running it, is on a Raspberry Pi, which I happen to have here. So really, a Raspberry Pi is just another computer. There is nothing fundamentally different between this little computer that runs Linux and my Linux laptop down there, or even my Mac or anything. It's a computer. You can plug a keyboard and a mouse in, and you can plug a monitor in on HDMI, and it's a desktop computer. It just so happens that this is a $9 computer that's about the size of a bit bigger than a stick of gum, but smaller than a deck of cards. So this is a Pi Zero, and actually you can see in there that this one is in one of their cases, so it's a tiny little board. Let's see if I can open it up. Oops. But in there, the chroma key of the cutting out the screen is probably going to make it's going to make the green board go see-through, which is really cool. But we've got a tiny little circuit board and an SD card. And this one's actually got a camera attached on the front as well. So the Raspberry Pi camera module, and then that's just a USB to power it. But what I then have is up here. Again, I have a terminal I can SSH into my Raspberry Pi. I've got NodeRED running on here, and somewhere this is NodeRED running on my Raspberry Pi. So this IP address here is the address of my Raspberry Pi, 192.168.1.185, port 1880, and I've got my editor set up here. And there's a couple of additional, there's some old stuff here, but there's some additional nodes for the Raspberry Pi that you can install. And one of these is a camera take photo node. So as a quick test, let's just see if I fire that connected. There we go. take a photo. Yep, and it's output. Oh, yeah, go on.
Can you zoom in a bit, please?
Oh, yeah. Make the editor a bit bigger, Alex. Yeah, we can try that one. So, yeah, that's it's a fairly simple flow, really. We're just using this take photo node, which we can configure some things like our image resolution and what we want to do with it. But when I trigger it, in this case, it's taken a photo, and somewhere it's told me the name of the file. It saved it on the memory card of the Pi. Now, what I've then got is a little URL, which should, just to prove that this is actually taking a photo on my Pi. I think, will this work? Page. Yeah, here we go. Okay, it's done it sideways on, and you can see actually that's what it really looks like behind me because it's a green screen and not the thing. I should have rotated it round the other way, but yeah, that's so that's the file being served up off the Raspberry Pi by NodeRED. There we go. So as I flow back to that, so we can say take a photo, and it will give us the name of the picture of the file where it saved it on the card. And then if I take that and put it into this URL handler, this will basically get the image off the file system and serve it up on the web server. So let's try it again the right way up, shall we? I think that's done it. I've probably done a delay there. There we go. So I need to copy the file name, and we'll have a new 192.168.1.185 or 1880 / photo, and the name. So the photo just has like a random ID. Oh dear, that's not a good photo. But there we go. So, we've got basically what we've got there though is a Raspberry Pi running NodeRED entirely on it with a camera, and it's taking photos and it's publishing those photos out. And obviously we could do something clever like hook that up to, say, an SMS API that meant you could send it an SMS and it would take a photo and SMS you back the link to the photo that you could then view. But so NodeRED will run on a lot of things, right down to a $9 computer. And really, I guess the question, depending on where's best to run it, depends on what you're going to do. If you're going to do something that maybe wants hardware, or you want something that wants to run constantly on like a dedicated machine, but it wants to run inside your own house because, for example, you're controlling your smart home. So I have another Raspberry Pi down on my desk, which is a slightly beefier one, Pi 4, that controls all of the smart home stuff in my house through NodeRED. Pis are great for that because it's relatively cheap, somewhere between $10 and $50 for a Raspberry Pi that's a completely self-contained computer. You can plug into your router, you can stick it on a shelf somewhere, and you can leave it ticking away. And it's not running out on the internet, it's running inside your house, but that's fine because, it's only talking to things inside your house. If you're wanting to build services that are going to run, and interact maybe with the Vonage APIs or with public web services and things, you probably want to run it somewhere out on the cloud. So that's why we're looking at like Heroku or IBM. If you just want to kind of experiment and start learning and getting started with this stuff, you can run it locally on your computer. The other one I forgot to mention that's on this, which is quite important, is something that Yulia and myself and Alex, Yulia's other half, have been working on, playing around with, tinkering, a bit of a side project for a few weeks now. What this is NodeRED. I'm just going to try and find a backdrop to show it. It's going to open my things. You probably can't see all of my screen, but this window here is NodeRED, but it's NodeRED as a desktop application. So what I've done is, instead of launching anything in a terminal, I've got, you can't see, but I've got an icon, let me drag up here on my desk, in my dock, or on my desktop, that I can double click the icon and it runs just like any other application, just like Slack or Firefox or anything, or Visual Studio Code, and that starts up NodeRED inside this application in my Mac. Probably need to stop the other one, and then again we've got our login to it, and we have our NodeRED editor inside this window. What it also has is some friendly things, like the settings are, so you can't quite see because off the screen we're showing, but the standard kind of file application menus are all here, and we can say open settings, and we've got some panes to configure our username and password there rather than having to go in and like edit files. If we wanted to change the port it runs on, if you understand what that is, then you might want to change it. If you don't understand what the port is, you probably don't need to change it. You're fine on the default. And also this ngrok feature, which I think we're going to talk about a little bit later on, but ngrok is a really useful tool for working with web services and exposing them on a local computer. So what we've done is we've kind of bundled ngrok in with this desktop application, and we can even start it from the menu by clicking it, connect, and it just connects automatically to ngrok. So you don't need to install anything. You can download the application from, it's actually on my GitHub at the moment. I think Yulia had a link somewhere. You were going to jump in the chat or something. But we
Yes.
can find it. I'll show you the page. GitHub Machin/workbench, which is what we're kind of calling it somewhere. There's releases. There we go. And so this is the latest release. Interesting debate on the numbering, but we're going with the Ubuntu style numbering, version 20.4.0, because this was the April 2020 release. Partly because actually this really just bundles up a whole load of other applications which have their own version numbers. So it's NodeRED version 1.0.6, ngrok version 3 something, and so on and so on. So we didn't want to kind of get our numbering confused. So our release numbering uses a completely different numbering pattern just to not confuse you. Yeah, so Workbench is actually, and I'm liking it quite a lot actually now. I don't know about you, but I've been using it more and more to just quickly open something up and test something out, rather than having to run a local copy on my server or anything. And again, I've got it on Mac, Windows, Linux, because it's built in this app called Electron, which is a web app framework. So it just takes like a local web application and makes it run like a native application. But there's a few other clever things in here with things like ngrok, so we can bring in the ngrok URL. I'll see if I can make it a little bit bigger. Don't know what that's going to do. It's not going to make the package bigger. Can I make that one bigger? No, we can't zoom the window terribly easily for OBS. But it's really just standard NodeRED. We've also bundled in all the Vonage API applications and the NodeRED dashboard, which we'll talk about another time. But you can still, Philly says this one, yeah, you can still install all the other packages, and it works pretty much exactly the same as standard NodeRED would. Just no need to kind of mess around with terminals and things to get started. So yeah, that's Workbench. Cool, and there's the link. Okay, so Yulia, do you want to show us some stuff about what we can do once we're inside NodeRED?
Yes. So one thing that is going to be in common, regardless of whether you're using local, hosted, or the Electron app, is the editor itself. It's going to look the same.
Do you want to go a little bit bigger? So I'm just thinking, can you zoom that a bit
bigger.
more? Yeah.
Let me try that.
Yeah, that'll do.
How about that?
Yeah, that's good if you can work in that. Yeah.
We'll make it work. Right. So I already have a couple of tabs open up in here. But when you first open the editor, you're going to have one clean tab, just like this Flow 6 that I'm having. On the left-hand side, you have your node palette. So all the nodes that come pre-installed in the default package, or any nodes that you might have installed in the meantime, like the Nextmo nodes I have in here, or the dashboard nodes. If there is anything that you would like to add in there, there are options under Manage Palette. So in the Nodes section, you can see everything that you already have installed. You can update from here, or click over to the Install tab and look for different packages, like, let's see what Google has.
We don't see your pointer, by the way. I just realised, Julia, in the screen share, we can't see where your cursor again. So Just go slowly. Give people's eyes a chance. I've just realised that it wasn't my point. It was my pointer, but yeah, we can't see your cursor because of the screen sharing.
Thank you. That's a good point. So whenever you selected something you like, you click install, which I'm going to do, although I have no idea what I'm installing right now. One thing to bear in mind is that whenever you install the package or update it, you will have to restart. Oh, that's a nice package. You will have to restart your NodeRED to make those changes.
I think it varies by updates. Often do. I think updates do, but installs don't usually. Because that one didn't, did it? It should appear. We'll see.
So we're having the trackpad problem that I thought we would.
I'm pretty sure when you install it, yeah. Generally, most packages, there's probably some that install some weird things, but most packages that you install shouldn't require it. But usually when you update a package, it'll say it needs to restart. Can't be quite why that is.
Yes. Sorry about that. Right. So there are different sections in your node palette. For example, in here, it starts with the common. And realistically speaking, these are the ones that you're going to use most of the times. Like the Inject node and the Debug node are the two nodes I use most of the time. One is because NodeRED is an event-driven system. And then the Inject node is giving an impulse that starts off your flow, which is your application that you've built. And the debug is, well, console log of the low-code world. And every time you finish something you wanted to build, you click on deploy to save it. You will confirm the deploy if you have something in there that it doesn't like, but you are sure you've done it right. And then I can click on the Inject Node button to set it up. Now, it doesn't really do much because that's only just the timestamp. But I can come over to the debug area, which is where I'm going to see all my messages. So whatever I want to log, error messages, if I'm just interested in the value of a certain variable, I can see all of these in the debug area. Now,
so how did you select the debug area? Because I think we missed, what did you click on to make debug visible?
Oh, so up here, yeah, probably you can see anything I'm doing.
Yeah, we should be able to see that little, it's that little bug, isn't it? Not the eye. So by default, I think you're on the,
yes.
You'll be on the,
so it's the middle one that says debug messages. On the left side, there is the node information, which is currently empty. But if I come over and click on a node, let's say the Inject node, then it populates with different information. Well, it has a nice little story about what timestamp is and how it works.
This is basically your docs for your node, isn't it? Really, this is like for most of them. Yeah. Don't show the ones I built because they're probably really badly documented.
Well, sorry about that, but if you come over to one of the Vonage nodes and you click on it, right, then it's going to say what it takes as input, what it takes as output, and you're going to have a nice reference to the real docs that you can just click over to. I find it always really useful to just alternate between info and debug.
Especially, yeah, if
I have any issues,
outputs tell you what it's expecting. Most nodes don't have any particular requirements for expected. It's fairly common unless you're actually getting data from a previous node or doing things. But the outputs is really useful because it tells you what the output of that node will be and where to look for different things. So if it's like creates a call, it'll say the call ID and details will be in output of message.payload or something. So you know in your next node where to look for that data.
Yes, about message.payload. So the debug node by default will output the value of message.payload because that's how these nodes communicate in between each other by default. But you can also select the complete message object, which is all the information traveling in between the nodes that are connected. Now, in NodeRED, there is 3 types of context. One is the message context, so whatever is connected, we'll know about it. There is a flow context, so whatever I have on a tab like this, I'm going to zoom out for that. So this is one flow I've been working on. If I refer to something like flow.payload, well, not payload, but flow.uuid, for example, I have in here, then every part of this tab will know what I'm talking about. But if I click over to another tab, it will not. And then there is a third one, which is global. So if I set a global value, then every tab I have open in my editor will be able to pull in that value. Should we do a test for that?
Yeah. Let's putting something into flow or into global.
Well, something
yeah. It's just this.
flow and the global.
Yeah, flow is. I don't think I've ever used global. Well, no, I don't think. Generally, I tend to use things in flow, but most of the time because I keep things in one sheet. So yeah, actually, I do have some global ones in my smart home stuff. But,
I don't think I've ever used global, but flow always comes in handy.
The smart home stuff, because I've got a different tab for every room in the house. So all the stuff, and therefore there's some stuff that I want to be available to all of them. So that's why I've used global. But we'll talk about my smart home another time.
That's actually a good idea. People let us know if you want to see that. Okay, so we've looked at the common nodes. If you come further down in your node palette, you see the function nodes, which are, again,
go a bit
really
bigger
common,
again?
really
Sorry,
useful.
You've gone too small to.
Oh, too small. Sorry.
I think that'll do. Yeah. Especially the palette is the hardest one to see, actually, because they're all together and you can't read the text.
Yes. So there is a change node, and we're going to use that to set different values. So let's just, set message.payload to a string, like hello. So now if I run it, then in the debug area, we can see the hello part. The same way, I'm going to add another rule. And this time set flow.payload to hello there. Done and deploy. So if you hold down command on a Mac and click, then you can search for nodes and add them directly without having to go over to your node palette and look for them. And this is how I'm adding this one. Right. And I'm going to use another inject node in here. Some correct me if I'm
You can inject,
making this more complicated than...
No, I was going to say you can inject a flow variable, yeah. There's these way to do it.
So it's flow.payload.
Yep.
And what it does is it's going to send the flow.payload as the message.payload, which gets a little confusing.
Flow.payload is probably an odd term. Normally you would use something like flow.userid or flow.room name or some sort of variable name that's like covering your whole thing, because payload is the current bit of data typically. But yeah. Flow.hello.
Flow.hello.
Yep. And then we're going to send flow. And we're going to inject whatever flow.hello is at another point. So this is kind of your basics of storage. It's not. It's probably worth warning people here, and because I saw somebody getting confused with this in one of the Slack channels this week, that when we're setting stuff in these flow or global variables, that's still stored in memory. So that's going to be fine as long as NodeRED is still running. But if NodeRED restarts, I was going to say we can't do it because you're on a hosted one easily, but I could show it on mine. When NodeRED restarts, anything that's in flow something will be lost. So don't rely on it for like long term. Oh, I'm going to keep the count of the number of messages there, and if the server reboots, because if it restarts for any reason, it's gone. So if you need to persist data in a better way, you need to use some kind of database. But this is really useful for just passing things between different points in your flow and that kind of stuff.
Okay, so I'm going to clean my debug area just to make it a little nicer. And if I come over, then it will highlight the debug node that sent that specific message. And now I'm going to see the other one. Cool. So this one is the second one, which grabbed the flow.hello and further down in the same tab knew about the same variable. Now let's say if we make it global. And I'm going to need a new tab for that, which is a new flow. In NodeRED, kind of everything is a flow. And I'm going to inject global.hello. No.
But I think you didn't set it, did you, in the previous one? Because you hadn't yet triggered the flow on the other one. I was like, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So you'd set the rule, but you hadn't actually executed that change node, which is going to make it set. I'm out of drinks already.
Yes.
So that
one is the first one. When we're triggered, then this is the flow one.
Yeah.
And now if you go over to the other tab, this is going to be, yes, the global. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. So I guess, do we want to talk a little bit more about message? Because, and we talk about message.payload, but that's gone small again. But I think it's important to understand what message is. So message, in fact, shall we, if I switch back to mine, just because you can see my, and we're going to get some really cool inception of OBS there. Let's find a NodeRED instance that I had running. I won't use workbench. Start that one up. Okay, so I'll just I need to do the same thing, make mine a bit bigger. Oops, not quite that big. We'll go about that big. 150 is always good, I think. This, hopefully you can see that. But again, so we have our inject and our flow, and let's do a switch node because I like switch. So message.payload is not empty. So what we tend to do is when we talk about message, whenever a flow or a path through a flow starts. So when, in this case, you see we click this button, which is triggers our inject node. Normally that could be something else. That could be something like an HTTP node where it's an incoming web request, for example. So if I use an HTTP in node here, and we did that on /foo, so we're going to say listen to /foo. Let's take switch out. Actually, we don't need that. Similarly, that would be sent to here. I'm going to also change this to debug the complete message object so that we can see what message is. Deploy that. So this is the debug here. If I send my timestamp, what it's actually sent is this entire message object because I'm logging the whole object. And message object has, in this case, 3 parameters. There is always an underscore message ID. That's really more of an internal NodeRED like tracking thing for where it is. I've never used that. There's usually a message topic just because the inject node sets up a topic. And a topic can often be used for, let's say our topic is going to be test. Let's really do that. So if I send it again, we've sent the topic of test and a payload of it. So message is an object, and then message as an object has parameters, and those parameters could be objects, they could be strings, they could be integers in this case. Topic is passed through everywhere. In fact, now if I add in the change node into here, and we set message payload to be badges. So what I'm also going to do is I'm going to drop another debug node up here. So I'm going to do 2 debugs here. This debug node is going to capture what comes out of this inject node, and this debug node, let's just get rid of those, is going to capture what comes out of this change node. So you'll see the effect of the change node. This is where message debug is really useful because you can attach it in loads of places. And if I fire that, we get 2 messages. So we can say our first message, which is in this first object, highlighted in green, our topic is test, and our payload is the timestamp value. Now, in our next one further down here, where we've gone through that change, where we said set or change the message payload, our topic has been preserved because this node hasn't edited the payload, the topic, but our payload has been changed to badges. We've done it here. Similarly, I could add another rule here that says set message.topic to new topic. Maybe. And now if I run that, what we'll find is that both objects have been changed because this is changing different things in the message object. The message object is always passed all the way through these. And that, as I say, can be sent from anything. If we looked at the HTTP node, for a get on /test, HTTP nodes always need an HTTP response somewhere, just because otherwise they get confused. And we'll have, I didn't know about that command click, or I didn't, that's really useful. Message, and we'll log the whole message object out again. So I've got a really simple webhook set up here for /test, which I can test from my machine, and it's just going to return empty JSON. But if we go back, what we'll see is a new a new debug from this event has been fired. So our payload was empty because we didn't send anything in with our test. We also have these message.rec and message.res objects. Now these are to do with the HTTP node. And you don't usually need to really look into those unless you're doing kind of very low level HTTP stuff. But our message payload here is empty. If I was to add a query string, again, you probably can't see that because it's too small. But come on. It doesn't make the URL bigger, but if I add to my query string /test query string foo equals bar, which let's see that, was to send that, it echoes back whatever I've sent, but why is it logged me out of that one? Have I got a different? There we go. Here, our payload. Loving to play around with the Zoom today. 150. There we go. Here now, for this request, our payload contained whatever I put in that query string. So payload is really useful because that's the convention, I would say. It's not really a standard. You can use anything, but nearly all of the nodes, and certainly all the official nodes, will use payload as their place where they put whatever they've sent. And again, looking at that help file, let's get rid of that. You can see here the outputs of the HTTP node contains payload, which for a GET request contains an object of any query string parameters. Otherwise, it's the body. So if you do like a post, if you're doing a form, that's where the data will be put. So you can always use payload, but you should always. So payload is what to look at, where to look for information coming out of a node. However, if you're looking for something further down a flow in the node after you've done a bunch of other things, so maybe you've got the request and then we've done something to it, like we've gone off and read something from a CSV file and we've, looked up sent a tweet and things. That payload is only any good until the next node, because the next node will overwrite the payload if nothing else. Sometimes it takes the payload and reads it. Sometimes it replaces the payload with its own output. So it's typically what you find is that's why applications, or you maybe will set other things like the topic. So the topic is a really useful one if you want to kind of have a value that's going to be passed all the way through the message without being changed. But there are all these, if you imagine it's like a envelope. I'm trying to think of a really good analogy for this, but it's like a kind of a list, and all these things on the list are passed through from each one to the next, and each node will look at the items on the list and go, I'm going to change payload, but I'm going to leave. If I'm not changing anything, I'll pass it through. So payload is by convention changed. Others by convention aren't changed unless the node wants to do something specific with them. Good example of that is probably the file node, actually. That takes an input of file name. You can set message.file name and it will use that to be what to save the file as. And I think similarly file in, file in, here we go, is the one takes the file name in and reads a file and then outputs in payload the actual data of a file. The read file? Read. File in reads is actually a file output. File in reads the file, and they're very confusing nodes because they've got similar little icons. Sorry, I went off on a bit of a tangent, but I thought it was kind of it was easier to show on mine because I've got a cursor, and we must figure out how to get your cursor working for next time with screen sharing. Cool. So that was that. What else? Were you going to talk about importing and exporting?
Yep, we can do that. Let me know when I'm back.
Yep, back on you.
All right. So if you look at these tabs, you can see that what we've done now is in color, and the other ones are kind of faded. So that's because these are disabled. If you double click on any flow, then you can either disable or enable it. I'm going to enable this one and deploy to save. Now, let's say I have a problem with this flow and I would like Sam's input on it. If I know exactly that my problem is within this first part, I can just export that flow which is, well, funny thing about NodeRED that, can you see that highlighted in orange, or am I again
see your cursor.
showing?
Yeah, we can. It's a bit small, so you might want to zoom again. But we can see that the nodes. I can just about see. Yeah, there we go. Yeah.
Okay.
Like that. So
Yeah, I was just
they're now
interested,
selected,
but
so they've all got little orange boxes around them. I'll just do audio description for those
yes,
that can't see.
thank you. Just to make sure I'm not pointing at things people can see. Right.
So
Where was
select
I
the
going with
nodes.
this?
So you've selected the nodes, and then you want to export them. Do you want to try? Let's try that. Do you want to send them to me? Send them on Slack or something, and I'll import them
Oh
into
yeah.
mine. That'd be fun. Let's nothing like a
So
live demo.
hamburger menu on the right upper corner, and we're gonna find export. And
that's hard to see.
This is your flow in a compact format. I usually tend to go with the formatted one, even though it's long, but at least I can make some sort of sense of it. And copy to clipboard, but you could have also downloaded it.
So what a
And
flow
I'm gonna
is
send
basically,
it over.
what is a flow then? So what have we got? What was that data? It was hard for us to see on here, but what's the format we're using for that? When you export
JSON.
yeah, JSON. So it's just a JSON, a list of JSON objects is your flow, because really it's just describing your nodes and how you've laid them out. It's not the actual nodes, because those are the packages, but it's the blueprint for building how you built your flow. So it says this node is connected to this node, is connected to this node, and has this property. So do you want to Slack me that? Cool.
Yes.
And
it's not as a snippet, so
that's all right. I can copy and paste that. I think I might have to. Ooh, oh, first character was funny. That's right.
Okay, you get it right.
Oh no, too many. Right, that one. So send me that on Slack. I'll just right, let's switch over to me.
In the meantime,
I'm just gonna switch over to me so you can see me importing it.
Yeah, actually do that.
I was just going to show on JSON lint, which is a really nice linter for JSON. If I paste in Yulia's flow, this is kind of what the export looks like. So each node has various properties: the inject, Z parameter, the name of it. So you can give it a name, the topic, the payload, type. In that case, was the date, was timestamp. You know, X and Y is where it is on the canvas, and Y is telling you what other nodes by IDs it's connected to. And then we've got a stream node and a change node. Now, you don't normally need to read this as a human being. It's only weirdos like me that would read it. But just to test that it is valid JSON as well. So we can prove that that's valid JSON that you've sent me. So I'm going to go and import it. So I've got a clean flow here. I'll go up to this hamburger menu and select import. And I can either do it from a file, or I can just copy and paste it. I want to set it into the current flow. It always gets this wrong. Oops, there we go. Oh, and it's not going to recognize. That's an interesting test because I don't have all the nodes installed. But so what you can see is it's imported something that looks kind of like Julia's flow, but I've got these unknowns here for create, talk, stream, and create call. So it's copied some of her nodes, but not the others. Now that's because I don't have the package that supports these nodes installed in my NodeRED. So we said we exported her template, but we didn't export, or it didn't send me her packages. So you have to remember when doing this to install packages, but it's probably a good way to demonstrate, because I'm going to install, I happen to know, or I could ask Julia, that talk, stream, and create call, what package is that from? So, and that would be, she'd tell me it's the Nexmo package. So I can go and find that package and install it. It might have happened. I also recognize what it is because I know it, but I can't remember if there's a way to. There is a way to export your packages, I think, as well, isn't there? Oh, there we go, and we've got loads and nodes installed. Go on, and ooh, my NodeRED's hung, has it? It's just page. Okay, let's just re-import that again now into a new flow with that. Boom, and this time you can see, because it's already got, I think you need to have the the package installed, or you need to re-import it before you you need to install the package before you import the flow. But now I've got Yulia's flow here with her properties like the hello world that she's set on the talk. She's streaming a silent audio file, and she's creating a call. I don't want to create a call. That's all right. It's no phones. And the interesting one to note, though, is the only thing it doesn't export is credentials. So although it's exported the name of her credentials package, I think, yep, if I go in
But if you go to
edit it, they're blank because these are credentials. So these are security values. So when you export, it doesn't send it. It exports the fact that there's a set of credentials and what they've got a name, but it doesn't export their values. So I don't have her API key, her secret, and her application ID and private key. So when you move things with an export between machines, you'll need to recreate the credentials, which is kind of useful because she can send me a flow to look at and say, why doesn't this work? But she doesn't have to send me her secrets and that kind of thing. Obviously, there might be some other stuff. For example, in this case, in the create call, there might be some phone numbers. Now, actually, there's no sensitive phone numbers in here because this, I think, is the dial-in for Google Meet or something, isn't it? You were hooking it up to, and the other number is just one of your Vonage caller ID numbers. But obviously, if that had like her phone number in it or something, she might not want to send me that. But yeah, we can export and import between NodeRED instances. So sometimes you can use that to move between like your desktop and your Pi or something. But also it's really useful to be able to export it, to send it to somebody else to help you to look at something. If you're trying to debug something, certainly if you ask me for help with it, I always say, well, can you export your flow? And I'll just import it into here onto another tab and have a look at it. And that's why I've got 3,000 tabs open on my NodeRED editor, because they're all other people's exported flows. So what I'll do now is I'll just delete that flow. Cool. So what else are we going to talk about? I was going to talk about the servers, wasn't I?
Yes, so if you're running locally, then what you're going to do about it?
Yes.
For example, when setting up a...
So let's see, where's a good place to do that? We can... oops, no page. When I try and close the editor, if you haven't deployed, so deploy saves your changes, and if you've got unsaved changes, it says, are you sure you want to exit? So if I try and click that X now, it'll say, this page is asking you want to leave, data you have may not be saved, and I can say, oh yeah, stay on page. Deploy is basically save. So click on deploy, save, and now it'll let me close that cleanly, which is kind of useful. So yeah, how to get your NodeRED on the internet. Let's think about what we're going to use for this. Let's do this in work. Yeah, let's do this with Workbench, because Workbench is good for this kind of thing. I just need to close that one. And oops, not open up my passwords. Oops. There we go. Spotlight search. Workbench. Open up the Workbench app. Go. Although you won't be able to see in Workbench. No, change of plan. That's because I can't zoom Workbench for people. So we'll do it on my local clean NodeRED, and we'll install from scratch. We'll do it the old-fashioned way. In fact, that's really useful. So I've got my my get/test stuff here, but obviously that works to localhost or to the IP address of my iMac, which I happen to know is 192.168.1.2 or 1880, which is when it runs /test, and that will trigger that one. But these aren't available to the internet. If I want to use something like a webhook, then I need to get my NodeRED server talking to the internet. So there's a really useful application called ngrok. Now, ngrok is we've talked about it loads of times on the developer blogs and stuff. And if anybody's doing anything with webhooks, you're probably using ngrok. Ngrok is a service, and it's an application or a package that comes back to the service, and that service has a free tier, like all good services. So what it really does is it lets you, it tunnels your machine out from your network. It takes a port on your machine. In this case, the port NodeRED is running on, and it tunnels that out to one of ngok's servers, which I think are in AWS, usually looking at their locations. And they then put a web server on the front of that and say, give it a web URL and say, any traffic sent to that URL, we're going to send down this secure tunnel to your application. So only that one port, that one application you're developing is the only thing that's exposed to your internet. So generally, it's pretty good from the point of view of securing a machine, because you're not putting your whole computer on the internet. You're just exposing that one server. If you've ever done like port forwarding on routers, when you log into your router and set up port forwarding to say any requests coming to port 9000 forward to this IP address with NAT and stuff, it's a very similar kind of scenario. It does a few other nice things actually, because it gives you SSL. So the server that ngok are running has an SSL certificate on it, whereas if you're running it on your home machine just with forwarding ports to your router, you won't get SSL. So if you want to do stuff like WebRTC or any of those kind of things, that these days that require SSL, ngok is really handy there. And also actually gives you a name. You don't have to put in the IP address of your home computer name, of your home internet connection. You get a something.ngok.com. ngok.com? ngok.io. Okay, what is that? ngok.io, isn't it? Yeah. So the free service obviously has some limits, like you can imagine. The main limits are the number of connections you can have. So you can only ever have one process at a time, I think, with 4 tunnels. So you can have 4 ports running through it, and there's a rate limit. To be honest, I don't think I've ever hit the rate limit on the free service. So unless you're doing something quite insane, really, this is kind of a development tool far more than it is a production tool. I wouldn't suggest running your service forever behind ngok, but it's really useful for development and stuff. Once you pay, the major thing you get is you can have your own fixed names, which feel like having a vanity name. So instead of getting ABC123, and every time you connect, you get a new name, you can reserve your name. So I have sammachin.ngok.io, which I know is always my ngok address. So this is the ngok service. I say you don't even have to sign up to use it. You can use it anonymously. I think anonymously you're limited to an 8-hour connection, isn't it? Whereas if you sign up for the free account, you get you still have the random names, but your connection can stay up for, I think, infinitely, or at least until their server reboots. But what we've done, again, to make things easier is, because ngok is a command line tool, there's an ngok package for NodeRED, which was written by a really, really amazing person. So this wasn't my day job. I think I wrote this. I last updated this on Christmas Day, because it was Christmas Day. And my wife was working, just to make I'm not like sad loner at Christmas or anything. Well, I was a sad loner on Christmas Day, but we had Christmas Day on Boxing Day. So on Christmas Day, I did a whole bunch of updates. I wrote this late last year, and then I updated and thought it's Christmas, so we'll make it version 1.0.0, which I think the commit comment is bump version to 1.0.0. It's Christmas. So we install that package. Through here by finding the ngok. This NodeRED contrib ngok is just a convention that everything on NodeRED uses. So it says it's a NodeRED package, and it's a contribution package rather than an official part of the sort of core NodeRED, and then what it is. But you can just search for ngok and install that. And what we now have somewhere is, he says, there we go. I installed the next package. This dark green globe ngok node. So we can drag this in. I'm just going to make some room because I'm a bit OCD about my layouts. And put ngok at the top. And if we open this up, it's going to say, do you want to add your ngok auth? And if you have an ngok token and stuff, you can add it here. I won't for a minute. But if you've signed up for an account, you basically get a token. It's a great big long string. You can put that in there, and that's like your ngok password. The port that you're running on, I think it will pick up by default, but I'm just going to set that anyway to 1880 because that's where my NodeRED is running. The region, again, it defaults for this. It'll default to the US, and it'll default to HTTP. And if I wanted to put auth in front of ngok, so ngok will secure it with the username and password. This isn't the same as securing your editor. So if you're using NodeRED, I would say generally, if you're just using webhooks, you don't want to put this on because it'll put secure. Well, if you want a password on your webhook, you'd need to set that up there. But by default, I tend not to use that. So we'll just set those default things. And there's a change I'm going to add because I'm going to add a button to this ngrok like the inject node, so it does the same thing. So you can turn it on and off, but at the moment we need to send it. In fact, I can't quite remember. I wrote it and I can't remember what the format I used for the thing was. If we look at our information, yeah, here we go. So this is saying ngrok expects the input for message.payload to be on or off to start or stop the tunnel. So we need to send it an on. That's going to be a string. I couldn't remember if I'd set it to true or false or on or off. And if we want to turn it off, we need to send it a string saying off. So we send commands to our ngrok node. And in fact, we can also see what our output is. Message.payload will contain the ngrok public URL that is established or null if the tunnel was stopped. So we'll send in an on, and it will into payload, and it will send out an address where ngrok is connected to. So let's just fire these up. Normally, you'd be worried that there's an invalid properties. You don't need to worry too much with ngrok. This little triangle. It's because I haven't set a password, but the password is optional. So I'll set my debug. I'll delete that. Now, if I send an on into my ngrok, bing, there we go. I've got my tunnel connected with this address, d67413bf.ngrok.io, and it even handily puts a little green dot and the name underneath it on your tunnel when it's connected. And if I send an off, it'll say disconnected and it's gone. And if I send another on, I'll reconnect and I've got a new address. So you can see, here's one of the problems, that every time we reconnect, we get a new address and we don't know what that address is. Fortunately, this node will output that address, so you could use it somewhere. But so now I have that address, I can go to my web address, and instead of putting in my IP address /test, I can send here blah 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 8e76 whatever it is .ngrok.io query and like parameters foo equals bar. And I'll send that, and that's gone through ngrok. So it's gone from my computer over to ngrok servers on AWS in Virginia or somewhere, down the tunnel back to my machine, and it's been output here by the handled by the get test / with foo bar on that. So now my my NodeRED instance is running on the internet right now on this E37C675. In fact, if we went to that address on its own, what you'd see is, I think it'll ask me, should ask me for the password because it's a different domain. It's going to be a little bit slow because we're streaming and tunneling and everything, but there we go. It's actually loaded up my NodeRED, so it's now asking me to log into my editor because that's what's running on the default. But fortunately, I've put a password on my editor, so you can't. So even if you go to that page, you wouldn't be able to get to my editor. However, if I hadn't secured my NodeRED because I was using it by default out of the box, it would have just let you straight into the editor like that. So this is why it's important, if you're going to run something like ngrok to expose your NodeRED, that you need to secure your NodeRED, which I think we actually put, if I remember rightly, it's in the help docs for ngrok somewhere. It's in the flows package page when you look at but when you look at a node, manage palette, ngrok. Can you see now? I've clicked on install, I think. Yeah. When you go to the search,
there should be a link.
Yeah, there's this little link here, this little arrow by the thing, which if you click on it, takes you to like an about page for whatever package. And this is kind of fed off the NPM and stuff, but here is the about page, so flows.nodered.org for my package. And you can see down here, danger, by running this node, you're exposing your NodeRED install to the public internet. You're strongly advised to set an admin password on the editor. And some of the description of how it works. And that takes us to a really handy little link on how to secure your NodeRED. So if you are running it on a Raspberry Pi, or you're running it locally on your machine, then this is what you need to do in order to set up a username and password, which is a little bit tedious. So you have to go in and edit a settings file. You have to generate a password hash. Here, there's a command to do it. So you have to open up the terminal to do this stuff. But let's see if we can. Make it bigger. So for low code, we're going to do password, but we can type node. Do I have it on here? Oh, Hope I could spell NodeRED admin. I think it's hash pw. And it'll ask me what my password wants to be, and my password is going to be the very secure password 123. You can't see it typed, and it'll generate a hash there. So you have to run that, and it gives you this horrible looking string, which is a hashed encrypted form of your password. And then you can go and edit your settings file, which is held. It'll tell you here the path to it, but it's usually in your home directory, NodeRED, and go in and there's some text to edit for the credentials, and you can set what the username you want it to be. By default, admin is good, or set it your own, and you put your password in there. And normally you just give one username, admin, with all the permissions. This is why one of the things I really like about the Workbench app that we've created, and again that Heroku one, is that it sets up the password for you without you having to do a bunch of configuration. So it's really kind of handy for low code, because the stop that and open up Workbench, show you the Workbench way of doing it. Is we open up Workbench. If I log out, so I was logged in right now, and if I go to settings in the main menu, and bring in the settings, I can choose my username, and I'm going to make my username badgers, and I'm going to make my password badgers. It says, do you want to restart now? Yes. I'll restart Workbench, and now I can log into NodeRED with a username and password of badgers, and I'm in. So that's far easier and far more friendly for a user, is you can just edit it from a settings page on here to whatever you want it to be, and set your username. Equally, just to finish up maybe while we're talking about Workbench, again, ngrok, so you could still use the ngrok node in here if you wanted to, but also, unfortunately, you can't quite see, but just above the top of the screen here that I've cropped off, in the menu, there's a menu called ngrok, and that's got this option of connect, which if I tell that to connect, you probably again won't see, but I get a pop-up notification that says I've connected to ngrok. I think if I go into the menu, it's just out of reach, but it's shown me the URL in there that I've got. However, there's one other little thing in there. There's this, let's just disconnect that, this external URL purple node, which is unique to Workbench. And you can see that doesn't have any kind of input, so that's just a trigger. But if I wire those two up and we watch the debug, if I tell Workbench now to connect to ngrok, boom, it's this URL will also output the ngrok URL. So this is a little bit like the ngrok node, but just for Workbench, where it will spit out what my current URL is. So there's a few places you see it. You get a desktop notification, usually in the top, whatever corner that is, top right hand corner of your screen on a Mac. I think Windows is in the bottom left. Windows. You get it in the ngrok menu up in here, and also this external URL. Also, ngrok gives you this inspector, which is quite handy. So the ngrok inspector is another window that opens. Again, you get this with ngrok as well as with any ngrok, but that would show you currently what you're connected to. There we go, and I'll make a get request to it, and there's nothing to handle it. And you can actually see all your requests that are coming through ngrok, so it's super powerful as a debugger for seeing what's being sent and stuff.
So how would I see that if I'm using NodeRED locally and not in Workbench?
Good question. So ngrok has, again, these wonderful 127.0.0.1 IP addresses. If you go to 127.0.0.1, localhost, colon, so port number 4040, that's where the ngrok inspector runs. And that way you can see all your requests. So there was a get request to slash, and it 404'd because there was nothing to handle it. So clear that and just put it in here and do another one. So we can do ngrok.io / my test query badger equals angry. Send some data. Again, it's going to 404 because there's nothing in NodeRED to handle that. But in the ngrok inspector, we can see, yep, there was a get request to /mytest, and it had a query parameter of badger, and the value was angry. So we can, and 404 was sent. So it's really handy for seeing kind of all kinds of stuff about what was sent through ngrok. It's you don't need to do a lot of logging in your code if you've got the ngrok inspector. So if you don't know about that, it's super useful. And you can also see all the stuff about your tunnels and what they're forwarded to and that kind of thing. But yeah, mainly I say this one, and you can see how long it took. You can also replay it, actually. That's quite a useful feature. So that's pointing to this one. So let's just make a handler for it now. So I might 404 because I had nothing to deal with it. But if I drag in some HTTP nodes and say, yeah, I'm going to handle /mytest here. And what am I going to return? What can we return quickly? Tell you what, let's return after a delay. Let's do something clever. So let's do a delay of 1 second. So we're going to, a request is made to mytest. We're going to delay for 1 second. We're going to set message payload to hello. And we're going to return our HTTP response. So if I do that,
Can you make that any bigger?
No, because it's Workbench, and I can't zoom Workbench. I don't think. Oh, we can. Slightly. It's just application. There we go. Or I can. Yeah, is that better? A little bigger. NodeRED seems to take over the thing, but we can use the menus to zoom it. There we go. Oops, let's just drag that into here. So yeah, we've just got our get my test, wait a second, set the value of message payload to hello, and return. So now, without even having to make the request, I can use this replay on ngrok to replay the request, and you can see there it actually took this time so previous request took 1.61 milliseconds, which is next to nothing. This one took 1.01 seconds. So there was the 1 second delay plus a little bit of time for the actual other things of the code to run. And this time, so I sent exactly the same request. I didn't even have to remake my request because ngrok can like re-inject my request. But it returned to 200 OK because I had something to handle it. And my response actually this time contained the hello. I still sent my angry badger, but I got back a nice plain hello. And again, if we were to change, oh no, I don't want to send hello. I want to send goodbye. I can change my requests to what I sent back in my code. And I want to rerun what's sent in again. I can replay that request again. 200 OK, and now it's saying goodbye. And on that link, that's well positioned way to say goodbye. Do you like what I did there? So yes, I think that's probably it. That's been what, an hour and 10 or so. I'm just looking at the comments. Who we miss? Oh, Ball Builded Builder said this is so cool. I feel it's like grown up Lego. Yep, it's definitely got that Lego, and it's got that kind of you keep adding things. You know, you play with Lego. You just like, oh, I'll just add another bit here, and I'll just add another thing that does this. I used to build crazy contraptions as a kid, but it really does make you want to keep kind of tinkering. What are we going to talk about next time? Have we decided yet?
Yes, we have. And it's going to be if this, then that.
Ah, yes, cool. I should go and revisit if this, then that. But yeah, so some more low-code stuff. Really simple IFTTT linking stuff up. So a little bit like Zapier, maybe a little bit more, things a little bit more consumery. In fact, that reminds me, I've got a cool thing we can use with IFTTT. So this little white dongle with a USB stick on it, we're going to connect that to IFTTT, and you can find out what it does. So cool. The other things we should mention, again, the coupon, because we will talk about the coupon. It's the promo slot. New coupon code this month. So Twitch533 is your coupon for Vonage API credit at dashboard.nexmo.com. €10 I should say, sorry, of free credit if you want to play around with those APIs and see what you can do. And yeah, we'll be back in 2 weeks. Thank you, everyone, and speak to you soon.